Retrospect is mid-season 4, to give it some context. 7 has settled into the show, Astrometrics is complete, and Voyager is spreading the news of what Starfleet stands for by blowing things up. Well, this is all a demonstration. Janeway is looking to buy a new superweapon from this guy.
This is good. Usually I just buy doomsday weapons, and I never use them and they just clutter up the place. Still, I like to send Harry down there to inventory them and then pop a paper bag behind him when he's not looking, so they're not a complete waste.
And I'm prepared to give you astrometric charts spanning 12 sectors. You'll find them unusually precise.
We're anal about that kind of thing. There's not a pimple on the ass of the universe we haven't cataloged within an inch of its life.
Janeway barters the maps and some chips for the gun and installation.
That guy is worse than a Ferengi.
But we're happy to do business with him anyway. So there's no reason we wouldn't do business with a Ferengi arms merchant too if we were ever to spot one. But anyway, to help with the installation, Janeway tells Chakotay to assign 7, who's been in the doghouse over some recent trouble with Species 8472.
You've been asking for more responsibilities. I thought you'd be pleased.
The captain gives me greater liberty only when she needs my expertise.
Trust us, being useful is the only way to survive around here. She doesn't like this guy, but 7 agrees to work with him. But the two get along like oil and water, until... Don't worry, there's no charge for your jaw realignment. After the titles, Kovan, our weapons dealer, is naturally peeved while he's being treated in sickbay, and Torres, in a surprising move, rises to 7's defense, saying that it wasn't as simple as Kovan makes it sound. But still, 7 did punch the guy in the face. I guess the only recourse is to make her chief engineer now. That is how the system works around here, right? So Janeway has 7 called in.
I think we've established that traditional disciplinary actions don't work with you.
Have you ever heard of a thing called bastinado?
Janeway concludes that 7 needs to learn the difference between having an urge and acting upon each whim, at least until she gets her own ship, of course. The doctor also tries to explain during her routine examination that she has to learn to accept that few, if any, will measure up to the high standards that she sets for them, but 7 is too busy looking like he kept all his gynecology instruments in the refrigerator. He's concerned and so tries a more thorough scan, but this just causes her to have a panic attack. It's so bad that the off-button hypospray is required, and Janeway is called in to look at a graphic. The doctor believes that something is blocking memories in 7, and these are only just now being slowly revealed, so they can just fully reintegrate them and let 7 deal with whatever's in there. That sounds complicated, but not to worry, he can do that because he reprogrammed himself to have the ability to treat mental issues like a counselor. And I'm sure you'll be on the road to feeling better knowing that he's there to tell you how great he is at it. So he starts to try to get her to explore this memory stuff thanks to some good old-fashioned psychology soup and a forehead thingy. Clearly a neck thingy that's just been put in the wrong spot. So he wants her to describe the first thing that she pictures in her mind.
A medical tricorder. Duratanium casing. 7.6 centimeters by 9.8 centimeters by 3.2 centimeters. Alphanumeric display.
Yeah, we got it. Thanks, Alexa. Eventually, she reveals that she has a memory involving Kovan when she was kept restrained. He removed Borg nanoprobes from her without her consent.
He performed a surgical procedure on me. He extracted Borg technology from my body. He violated me.
Which is an accurate description of what it's like to have someone take a tissue sample without your consent and then alter your memories. Of course, Voyager promos have the honesty of a used car salesman in debt to the mob, so they took the clip out of context along with several images of 7 lying back struggling and making pained grunting sounds, clearly trying to imply that 7's experience was a much more graphic nature than what it actually was. So, having established that the network people have no souls, as if you needed proof of that in the first place, on with the episode. With the doctor's prompting, she digs further into the experience, starting out with a handheld weapon testing range, where she and Paris were testing the destructive power of Kovan's leaf blower. 7 has ideas on how to improve the targeting, the weapon's main disadvantage, so she went back to Kovan's lab, where he made the adjustments and then shot her with it. When she came to, she was restrained on a table, pumping her full of chemicals to make her produce more nanoprobes, and then he and his assistant extracted nanoprobes from her and injected them into someone else. That's a lot of trouble to go to for high-tech piercings, but people are going to pay a fortune for it. The next thing she recalls is being back in the lab where she had been, Coven claiming that her hand had been injured when the weapon malfunctioned and acting like he hadn't just played Dr. Frankenstein's twisted nephew on her and some helpless victim. The doctor immediately tells Janeway, Paris, and Tuvok what happened, so Janeway asks what evidence they have to corroborate this. Paris said that she was gone 2 hours, but also that she was fine when she returned, showed no sign that she'd been through any kind of an ordeal. But the doctor says Coven likely used some kind of device to suppress the memories of the event, and Seven's own nanoprobes were then used to cover up the physical signs of the event. But Tuvok is concerned.
You seem to be accepting Seven's recovered memories as fact.
Are you suggesting otherwise?
Historically, recovered memories have often proven unreliable.
Back in the 90s, repressed memories were all the rage. It was in X-Files, it was in Batman Forever. It had to do with alien abductions, childhood molestation stories. They were coming out of the woodwork. What Tuvok said was something repeatedly asserted, especially when ideas like hypnosis were bandied about, which was how Freud, whom I mentioned last week so it seemed appropriate, claimed to have treated a woman with such a condition that left half of her body paralyzed. A particular note was a study into whether or not this is a recent development or a historic one. Hallucinations, for instance, can be found in works from throughout human history, but the oldest example of repressed memory was an opera in 1786, suggesting that this is more likely a result of a cultural shift in the modern era rather than a characteristic innate to the human mind. Of course, this is neither here nor there. Even if something is universally agreed to be balderdash, that has never stopped Voyager before. Well, Janeway wants them to investigate further.
In the wrong hands, a single nanoprobe could lead to disaster.
But in our hands, it definitely will.
She questions Coven about it, and he is outraged at the very idea that he'd do this, and horrified that they take the accusation seriously. When he refuses to let them examine his lab, she threatens to go to the authorities instead.
Are you willing to risk our trade agreement all on the basis of one crew member's delusions?
Yes.
Guns are good and all, but I find fucking with people is its own reward.
So Tuvok starts questioning him about what happened, but he sticks with his story, that all that happened was a careless mistake that he's already apologized for, and that they don't realize how serious even an accusation is. Even if he's completely innocent and Seven just wanted to punish him, the guy in charge of everything is basically there to just rubber stamp whatever charges are made against him, just to ensure that the alien visitors aren't offended and going to blame their whole planet to cut off trade. In other words, if he's even accused, his life is effectively forfeit. He'd lose everything he has. Tuvok says that he can't stop this, only promise that this is going to be a fair investigation. No one is prejudiced against you. And on a completely unrelated topic, the Doctor is telling Seven that she should be outraged over what Coven did and hope that asshole swings from the highest tree. Seven is confused. She doesn't feel any of the emotions that the Doctor says that she is. So to help, he goes into detail about how horribly he violated her rights as an individual, using her like that and then blocking her memory of it, until finally Seven is foaming at the mouth. I mean, there's no time for a trial. She's just going to go down there and eat him right now. So the investigation begins with the magistrate, and the first stop is the lab, where the crime is alleged to have occurred. There are no examination tables for medical purposes, but the devices that she described are present, although with different functions than what she said. Still, the Doctor remains convinced that this is just Coven covering his tracks.
It's equipped with a monofilament stimulator. Could it be used to manipulate the neurotransmitter levels in a human brain?
The guy's a weapons merchant. I really doubt he has the kind of knowledge about a species that he didn't know existed last week.
Not as it is.
But with the proper modifications.
With the proper modifications, I could reconfigure your comm badge to manipulate neurotransmitters. What's your point?
I believe you've just made it.
But that doesn't actually prove anything. It merely shows that it can theoretically happen. But that's not evidence. I mean, a lawyer doesn't say in a trial or anything, you claim that you did not in fact rob the victim, but isn't it true that you do in fact? have hands? In addition, there's Seven's DNA and nanoprobes here, but since that would be consistent with Seven suffering the hand wound, it too isn't proof of anything. The only thing that's out of the ordinary is that Seven's nanoprobes are regenerating rather than being dormant, which they should be under those circumstances. Based on that alone, Colvin is going to be arrested and a full inquiry begun. Colvin is horrified, grabs a gun, and escapes via a personal transporter, so they beam up to Voyager and pursue. But the guy is clearly prepared for the worst, using a special weapon to knock out their sensors so that he can escape.
The fact that he's running shows that he's got something to hide.
It's hilarious that it's Chakotay that's the one to effectively say, no innocent person would run from the cops, which is the most white guy statement this side of, who wants to ride my monster truck to the CMA Music Festival? Janeway and Tuvok continue to examine the evidence, but they keep coming back to the same problem. The evidence isn't conclusive. It could be deliberate assault or just a careless accident. The only thing that isn't consistent with this story are the nanoprobes.
It might be worthwhile to simulate the effect of the rifle blast on Seven's arm and see what happens to the nanoprobes.
Good.
Shoot her in the arm right away.
Well, the result of the experiment shows that under the circumstances of the accident, the nanoprobes would indeed be regenerating as they were when they were discovered, meaning that the only proof besides Seven's repressed memory has just evaporated. While having switched on Seven's pissed off toggle, it's hard to turn it back off again. She is convinced that Colvin is guilty. But the others point out that it's possible the doctor's memory reconstruction technique drew upon her experiences of assimilation and seeing others assimilated and formed a stew with her dislike for Colvin, resulting in a confused recollection of events.
The doctor told me I would feel better when Colvin gets what he deserves. I want him to be punished. I won't settle for anything less.
Think that first do no harm thing got kind of mangled in this case, Doc. Voyager is not pursuing Colvin to let him know that they found evidence of his innocence, but after the way they all decided he was guilty before things even started, he thinks this is a trap. He starts attacking them, but he's putting too much power into it, winds up overloading his ship and destroying it. Seven comes by sickbay later to talk about how bad she feels about hounding him to his death, and the doctor feels so guilty he asks Janeway to remove his ability to make self-improvement so, he doesn't fuck up so badly again, but she refuses, so the end. Post-episode follow-up. There is no Neelix in this episode, thus giving it a +1 bonus to its final score. If you like, pretend that he's riding that target at the beginning, and you'll see why the +1 comes in. Final score for Retrospect is 5 out of 10. This is one of the most controversial episodes out there because it's considered by some to be analogous for never believing the victim in a rape case. If I'm siding with Colvin in this, it's because everything suggests and everyone concludes that he is innocent. And while I hardly let that alone convince me something's true, I find it hard to accept that this guy is such a master criminal that he can pull all of this off and cover his tracks so that there's not a single piece of evidence against him, and yet is so careless as to not have an equally thought-out escape plan. Keep in mind that if Seven is correct, he's not only got all of this complicated medical equipment housed somewhere, but he's also got an assistant and some drone, presumably created to harvest nanoprobes at some point in the future. That's not the kind of thing that you just have in the shed out back. You have to have some kind of complicated setup if you're planning to exploit and use all of that, and being able to whip it all up on a moment's notice. And yet here, when he's ready for the escape, he doesn't have some master scheme in order to get out of here that's reflective of someone with those abilities and access to resources. It's just some guy who's on the run. I'm not saying that that proves him innocent beyond any possibility of a doubt. All I'm saying is that the only thing that suggests he might be guilty is repressed memory, which is not only dubious, but is a concept that is largely rejected by mainstream experts on the human mind. The inspiration for this episode is not based upon rape in general, but those specific accusations of repressed memories that were used to convict people years after the fact, where the victim later said that they think the incident might never have happened now that they've thought about it. All I'm saying is don't get mad at me. I didn't write the episode so that Seven's recollection is only pulled out through techniques recognized to create fiction rather than truth. I just work here. The episode's theme is supposed to be about X, but because it can easily be translated to Y, that's why things get complicated. That's the danger of a message show. Sometimes people don't get the same message. But all that being said, the primary mistake of this episode is placing the emphasis of it in the wrong place. While it might seem that this is a 7 of 9 story, the reality is that this is really a story about the Doctor, at least as far as how it is packaged for the audience. Why was there no mind meld to try to corroborate this, or even suggest it or consider it an alternative to the Doctor trying to do this thing for the first time? We would have it in just about any other episode, remember? All the times, why don't we go into his mind and see what really happened or learn what's going on or whatever? No. This time, it's the Doctor. I've never done this before, but I'm awesome enough that I could pull it off on my first try. And let's make sure that we make a big federal case out of it, literally. Now, it's this way because the story is about the Doctor's overzealousness in his desire to better himself, his character journey. 7, unfortunately, is only along for the ride in that. And that's a huge blunder and exacerbates concerns related to 7's treatment as a victim. Because either one of two things happened here. Either 7 was the victim of a horrible violation, or the Doctor unwittingly constructed a memory in her of being horribly violated. Either way, 7 has been through a scarring event, even if it exists solely in her own mind. Handling and resolving this, rather than telling us she feels guilty that Coven is dead, and then that's that, would have placed the emphasis on her and what she has been through, rather than on the Doctor and what he does to others. By handling it this way, the trauma that 7 has undergone is ignored. And so it's no wonder that some people feel the episode is so offensive. If you already are angry that you feel a rape victim has been ignored, then it certainly doesn't help to say, yeah, sure, you've been violated, but what about my problems? Fuller and Klink were concerned about not making this come across like a date rape episode. And from the response, it sounds like they failed pretty badly.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
I'm afraid.